Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that money no longer represents value, only obligation. That what you earn, save, and spend is no longer anchored to anything real, but to promises written into law by institutions you never elected. You were told money was neutral. You were told debt was temporary. You were told the system was stable. But here's the unsettling mystery. If money is supposed to be a tool, why does it behave like a rule? Why do entire nations obey debt schedules more strictly than constitutions? Why do governments collapse, currencies fail, and populations suffer while the debt itself survives untouched? At some point in modern history, something quietly flipped. Debt stopped being a consequence and became the foundation. Money stopped being a measure and became a legal fiction enforced by policy. This is the story of when debt became law and money became fiction. Stay with me, because the most important answers don't appear until the very end. For most of human history, money was not mysterious. It was heavy, tangible, difficult to create. Gold, silver, grain, shells. Money was something with intrinsic limits. You could debase it, yes. You could clip coins, dilute alloys, hoard supply, but you could not summon it out of thin air. That constraint shaped everything. Kings could not wage endless wars without taxation. Empires collapsed when resources ran out. Rulers were forced to negotiate with their populations, because extracting value had visible consequences. Debt existed, but it was personal, local, and dangerous. Debtors could be imprisoned. Creditors could go bankrupt. Default was catastrophic. No one pretended debt was harmless. Money was scarce. Trust was fragile. Power was limited, and that limitation was exactly what some people wanted to escape. The first great shift came not with paper money, but with promises. Goldsmiths in medieval Europe noticed something simple. People rarely reclaimed all their gold at once, so receipts began circulating instead. Those receipts' claims on gold became money. At first, this system was honest. Then someone asked a forbidden question. What if we issue more receipts than gold? Thus began fractional reserve banking. Banks discovered they could create purchasing power simply by lending promises that did not yet exist. As long as confidence held, the system worked. When confidence broke, it collapsed violently. Still, governments saw potential. If money could be created through debt, then debt could finance power without immediate taxation. Wars, infrastructure, empires, all funded not by wealth, but by obligation. The key transformation was subtle. Money was no longer something you had. It became something you owed. The real turning point came when governments formally aligned themselves with banking systems. Central banks emerged, not to serve the public but to stabilize government, borrowing the Bank of England, the Banque de France, later the Federal Reserve. Each followed the same logic. Governments needed funding, banks needed guarantees, central banks provided both. Debt became institutionalized. Instead of being a temporary emergency tool, borrowing became permanent policy. Taxes no longer paid for states. Debt did. And because debt was now backed by law, default became unthinkable. Governments could fall, currencies could collapse, populations could suffer, but the debt endured. Why? Because debt had transformed from a financial arrangement into a legal obligation embedded in the system itself. For a time, there was still a restraint. Gold, even paper money, was tied, indirectly, to something finite. Then came the 20th century. World wars demanded spending on a scale never seen before. No amount of taxation could fund it. Gold constraints became inconvenient. So governments suspended convertibility temporarily, they said. Then, quietly, permanently. The final break came in 1971, when the gold link was severed. Money became pure fiat, declared valuable by law alone. From that moment on, money could be created without limit. Debt could expand without settlement. Interest demanded growth forever. The system now required expansion just to survive. Debt was no longer a tool used by the system. The system existed to serve the debt. Once money became infinite, something strange happened. Wealth exploded on paper. So did inequality. Asset prices soared. Productivity lagged. Wages stagnated. Why? Because new money entered the economy as debt, not income. It flowed first to banks, financial institutions, governments, and asset markets. By the time it reached ordinary people, prices had already risen. Debt wasn't eliminating scarcity. It was redistributing it. Entire nations fell into permanent deficit cycles. Developing countries borrowed to develop, then borrowed again to service old loans. A global hierarchy formed. Creditors dictated policy, debtors surrendered sovereignty, austerity replaced democracy. Debt had become law. Whenever the system trembles, leaders promise reform. They offer bailouts, stimulus, quantitative easing, debt restructuring, but notice the pattern. Every solution increases total debt. Crises are treated with more borrowing. Collapses are patched with new money. Why does this never end? Because paying off the debt would destroy the money supply itself. In a debt-based system, money exists only because debt exists. Eliminate the debt, and the money disappears. So the system chooses survival over resolution, delay over truth. Look around today. Global debt now exceeds global production by multiples. Governments roll over obligations they can never repay. Central banks suppress interest rates to keep the illusion alive. New financial instruments promise innovation but replicate the same structure. Digital money, tokenized debt, financial abstraction layered upon abstraction. The names change, the pattern does not. Every generation inherits obligations it did not consent to. Every crisis justifies more control, and every fix tightens the system further. Money is no longer a neutral medium, it is a governance system. Interest dictates behavior. Debt schedules dictate policy. Growth becomes mandatory, not desirable. And because infinite growth is impossible in a finite world, instability is guaranteed. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. Central banks suppress interest rates to keep the illusion alive. New financial instruments promise innovation but replicate the same structure. Digital money, tokenized debt, financial abstraction layered upon abstraction. The names change. The pattern does not. Every generation inherits obligations it did not consent to. Every crisis justifies more control, and every fix tightens the system further. Money is no longer a neutral medium. It is a governance system. Interest dictates behavior. Debt schedules dictate policy. Growth becomes mandatory, not desirable. And because infinite growth is impossible in a finite world, instability is guaranteed. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed. 3 takeaways. What this means for you. First, debt is not just economic, it is political power. Second, money no longer measures value, it enforces obligation. Third, systems built on infinite promises always reach a reckoning. The question is not if, but how. When debt becomes law, democracy quietly erodes. When money becomes fiction, truth becomes negotiable. And when the system finally resets, the rules will be rewritten again. The only question is, who gets to write them next? If this story made you see the financial world differently, support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video, because the most dangerous systems are the ones no one is allowed to question.